Since it's clear that you're not corrupt and you got elected, why should people think that the system produces corrupt results when there you are?
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but thank you for that, though.
I started thinking about it. The fear.
I think implicit in the system is corruption.
But to be honest, I enjoyed it. Nothing about me has changed. I realized that in front of the fountain. Almost feels like it's gotten worse.
Welcome back. Your Titan of the Obscured here with the 20th episode of the Megatronic Legacy Writing Saga. Previously, we discussed the lore of the afterlife, namely Cybertron and Yalherics, and Nibiru to a lesser extent. We now take a look at the Mortal Brothers 2019 OG OC, the character who went from a military commander to a tyrannical queen in that continuity, Misilleeka. This Dark Tyrant is one of my OCs and has been one of my recent favorites to write since her conception in 2020. She was portrayed as an anti-hero in her novels, only to turn into a villain later on in the 2019 saga. I've already discussed her novels in greater detail, and I even have the Mortal Brothers 2019 videos on my channel having her in them. I would suggest checking those out before watching this video to get the context. But I'll have short summaries for each of the two segments coming up next, and then discuss Senator Joe Biden. Yes, he's going to be mentioned here.
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt.
Afterwards, I'll go into conceptions, Misilleeka's election, democracy, treatment of Ripto, progressive fallout, dark redemption, and finalization. This is going to be a pretty involved video, so let's get started. Misilleeka was born under her dragon mother and seraphim father in Crystal Celestia. She was raised to become a member of its military base by going through an academy to prove herself. After spending thousands of years of her lifetime training and performing tasks, as well as befriending a genie princess, Misilleeka has been beloved by her followers, but witnessing her father's demise turned her into a monstrous warmonger, vowing to destroy anyone who gets in her way. Leading a revolution of seraphim, dragons, and rings, Misilleeka killed Sakharok and went to Next Netherworld as her new home. During her stay there, Misilleeka formed her own language, politics, and way of life. There have been a few significant events throughout her life, such as combating Godzilla, temporarily joining forces with Spyro to get back at the Prinnies, and so on. But it's just the gist of it. Somewhere after Kuika's birth, Misilleeka was killed by an ambush by the Seraphim who still followed the late Sakharok and succeed in doing so. Jatra becomes Empress following her best friend's demise. Following Etna and Eggman's exile into the Mushroom Planet, Misilleeka's ghost approaches them and offers a deal. She helps them get out of the planet if she gets control of Etna, essentially empowering her. They do so and enter Megacon's warship during their trip back to Cybertron, though Misilleeka-controlled Etna proceeds to smash Realm. She's determined to find Alakram for her ambitions. This leads to entering the Great Clock and resulting to traveling to the TGUL timeline. Misilleeka's ghost finds Vizon's Spear of Fusion and combining the fake Bowser and Ganondorf's ashes to make her new body. Misilleeka spends her role using the villains in her task to combat Shantae and her allies in Purgatory and Hell. The heroes succeeded in getting back home, but only for Misilleeka to following them and challenging Shantae into a fight to the final destination. This ends with Megacon joining his former enemy to overwhelm Misilleeka. Nothing was heard from her since she vanished. Biden was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania on November 20th, 1942. He graduated from the University of Delaware and Syracuse Law School. He also served on the New Castle County Council. Joe became one of the youngest to be elected as a senator in the U.S. at age 29. As many of you have heard, Biden shared stories of his tragedies of himself and family who went through accidents and injuries which served to be life-threatening. I'd feel sorry for Biden if he wasn't a liar. Regarding his education, in 1965 at the Syracuse Law School, only finishing at the bottom of his class of Delaware, plagiarizing speeches. Biden calls it inadvertent due to not having the awareness for rules of citation. I mean, if I was in this position, I'd provide sources and citations. Just saying. He spent years embellishing his accomplishments. Biden has claimed to have a higher IQ and was at the top half of 3 degrees, only to have 1 at the bottom. For a while, the media didn't really stood up for Biden due to his corruption and still got a seat in the Senate. His place in the Senate is where he's been going after several talking points to achieve more power over other politicians. Joe Biden's been a senator of Delaware from 1972 to 2009. Misilleeka was born from both a dragon mother and Promethean father and grew up in the northwestern region of Magic Crafters. This was during a time period when Prometheans were moving to Dragonus Nui due to a slight political shift in Metrospheris. Although Dragonus is the capitalist system of the planet, there was a political struggle between peacekeepers and magic crafters. One incident occurred when Misilleeka's father, Levergrak, traveled to PK and has been making propositions with one of its older governors, namely Boris, to limit weapon use and allow his military to do all the work. Boris wasn't keen on taking his citizens' weapons anyway, which would go against his state's values, and declines. Levergrak kept persisting and even threatened a military push against Boris and his people. How it would seem like at first, Boris was called a corrupt leader by Magic Crafter civilians for allowing weapon violence and rioting, even resulting to the death of Levergrak. What actually happened was that Levergrak threatened a nationwide war if Boris refuses to negotiate with strict weapon laws. He sent a group of assassins to attempt assassination of Peacekeeper's governor, which sparked a war between those of PK and MC. Levergrak lived throughout this war until one of Boris's associates fought him. The associate, Conan, faced Levergrak and fought inside a chamber at Wizard Peak. What a Magic Crafter states. The war got intense, that Levergrak and Conan both fell inside a hot chamber, essentially dying in the process. Years later, Misilleeka grows up and hears news of her father dead. She was devastated by this information and kept looking for why it happened. One of Levergrak's associates, being Malefor, tells Misilleeka that Boris is to blame for his death and actually bought it. Misilleeka takes it upon herself to start her own political movement as she grew up. She built up a following by introducing concepts of Megatronic convoys' teachings and any of the taboo philosophies that would be deemed blasphemous to the dragons. Satanic National Socialism. She proposes higher government intervention and stricter laws on a lot of things, but in a more nationalistic point of view. Misilleeka takes a tougher stance on putting the dragons and all living in Dragonus Nui under her thumb for whoever will or not have said rights. Protection of private property, free speech, etc. In her prime, Misilleeka plans a nationwide war like her father had before and brings in the dragons who shares her views, and along with the anthropomorphic Prometheans such as Zolkar. She begins her first full-on war to leave waste to peacekeepers. This also dragged both beastmakers and artisans to fight back against her reign. Even some of the Magic Crafter civilians detracted from Misilleeka's totalitarian propaganda. It does end up in failure for her, but she quickly brought her minions to a portal which sent them to a world called the Nexus Pillar. Before I get to the election aspect, let's discuss how Misilleeka took over Misilleeka. There was another faction which had Seraphim occupying the realm, former Cybertronian angels who left Primus, but refusing to take Megatronus convoy's side. It was largely moderate in terms of their policies, but as soon as Misilleeka and her military stepped in, she proposed a fairer way of life under her reign. There have been several electives in their own Seraphim plane, and elected officials all the way from Megatron's rise to power prior to the rise of Syndicalist socialism at Voya Nui in the 1910s. Now we get to the elections. Misilleeka has been pushing for her National Socialist agenda to increase her government control. The first time she tried to, she lost to one of the older Seraphim. One specific event taking place shortly after was one of the civilians, presumably a female Promethean seraph, living on Misilleeka suffering her loss of independence when another used her as a scapegoat. This gives Misilleeka the opportunity to get a majority of its female population to side with her. As years went by, Misilleeka's influence with her audience grew and eventually coming close to winning her spot as Mystica's ruler. Once she got a hold of it, she ends up committing vote fraud and rigging results to lean in her favor, especially when her socialist agendas affect people negatively. She lies about these problems and kept using them as scapegoats to garner more favor throughout the years. I talked a bit about her treatment towards Ripto and the effects of it in my Ripto video. To sum it up in short, Ripto lived a life of misery under Misilleeka's control. She pushed a little Ripto to the point of despair and insanity. This wouldn't be exclusive to Ripto, however, for a good chunk of Misilleeka's followers would get a similar treatment, though some of that could be small, such as treating some of them as if they meant little to nothing to her, simply pawns in her political game, including Etna herself. Misilleeka expects loyalty from her minions, but nothing else in return. She comes to think of her actions, though Misilleeka does realize she's mistreating her crew, she also thinks of it as a strength in order to boost up her position of power. a true totalitarian by nature. Misilleeka makes her appearance in this origin storyline as a satanic National Socialist dictator. She allies with Zerg and the Paraka, though temporarily with the latter, given the Paraka Squad's betrayal in 1947. The Dark Queen becomes the military muscle to this alliance, as she's well equipped and experienced in warfare. Neither faction prior to the Xenoclist alliance are up to her caliber. Having the Dark Energon reserves, Misilleeka shares it with the Paraka, as they too shared synthetic Energon. I discussed much of the storyline in Etna's episode, keeping Misilleeka at focus. She expects more reserves to go to her while the Paraka agree to utilize more Energon samples for their weapons and machines. Case in point, Vuporak. Having both gold and synthetic Energon on Vuporak meant he'd have the necessary powers to turn anything into dust once his temporal powers were initiated. This also means with the synthetic Energon combined could give him recovery that he needs to rejuvenate quicker. Misilleeka signs a mandate that each member must be sampled with Dark Energon, essentially signing themselves to show their loyalty to her, despite the Paraka stabbing her in the back later on. Fast forward to 1954, Misilleeka receives word of Gojira's destructive power and its passing. She wants a weapon that could be capable of mass destruction. She sends out Etna and her allies to find Godzilla's DNA to create a clone, which she can use Dark Energon reserves to make it under her will. Sadly, many events previously discussed in earlier episodes would foil her plot to committing her plan. For 5 years, Misilleeka hasn't made a solid plan since her Godzilla clone plan got screwed by Velvet Crow. Following the ending of Awakening of Godzilla in 1984, Misilleeka and Etna find out about the Genie Realm's depowered state. The latter is sent to investigate, and a battle ensues. This led to several heroes and villains joining the fray in her homeworld, Misilleeka. Senator Joe Biden enters the story as he follows Richard Nixon into space and tries to impede his journey. However, he decided to keep a low profile for the time being. All the chaos, as previously stated in this segment, would prevent the young senator from doing the deed. Misilleeka orders Etna, Mikai, and Vuporak to safeguard the Matrix's leadership from being taken by Spyro and any of his allies. While that's going on, she takes a look at Ripto and his minions in their defeated state, as stated in their part in Ripto's episode. Misilleeka plots to do something horrible to the little Riptok and his people for betraying her. By the start of this story's journey in the Dark World, Misilleeka persuades Biden into joining her with the promise of an immediate presidential election against Reagan if he can eliminate Spyro. He's more lenient to kill Conquer since he's connected to Reagan's influence and try to sway the voters by his side. Misilleeka does all she could to prevent Spyro's progress from getting further. Despite all of her efforts, the Purple Dragon thwarts her militia and is forced to find the Matrix herself. Not only that, she takes both Light and Dark Energon to the point of Energon fusion, becoming one of the few beings tampering in this taboo act. Essentially becoming drugged out of her mind, Misilleeka goes berserk. Having no other option, she takes Senator Joe Biden by her side and both create the Bider Misilleeka mech, resembling a mix of Cinder, Malifor, and Metal Madness. A part of it, preferably the main body, resembles Biden's face with sunglasses. The final battle takes place at an ocean comprising of Crystal Energon mixed with Light Energon. Spyro, Velvet, Flan, Conquer, Nixon, and several others join to the battle against the Dark Queen. The Purple Dragon takes the Matrix of Leadership and creates a powerful mech resembling Kiryu from Godzilla, but in Spyro's color scheme and design. With the mech in his possession, Spyro's Kiryu Gurren form, and his allies joining his side, takes on Misilleeka's mech, and both fought furiously. Eventually, Spyro unleashes a powerful berserk mode which overwhelms Misilleeka's robot and eventually destroying her in the process. Biden was left alive shortly after, but was taken back to Earth in cuffs, revoking Biden's chances of ever running for president due to helping Misilleeka by killing Conquer and illegally electing him. I mean, it's pretty obvious in our current timeline. Born as a magic craftsman, Misilleeka lived her years under both Promethean Father and Dragon Mother, in a central liberal state. Political issues ensued between peacekeepers and magic crafters as the issues of weaponry took over. Misilleeka's father proposes a ban on weapons, which did not sit well with peacekeepers Governor Boris. This political battle led to warfare, which inspired Misilleeka to start a movement full of people who share her father's vision, arguably to a greater length than Leningrad could ever advocate for. Misilleeka takes a tougher stance on her beliefs and takes over Misilleeka despite the tribulation she faced throughout her lifetime. Misilleeka takes over Misilleeka as her new homeworld and has rigged elections to maintain her position for all time. Her military is the backbone to any alliance she formed to combat her opponents. Unfortunately, the Paraka's betrayal has scarred her military and her weaker allies. Still, Misilleeka proceeded with her plans of weaponry capable of potential mass destruction. It all comes down to her last chance of confronting her conservative and moderate foes who stand in her way. Will Misilleeka go to great lengths such as using Energon fusion as Megatron and Megatron's convoy have before her? Only Unicron and Primus will tell. Misilleeka is one of my favorite OCs to write. Not only is there a lot of potential in her role as a villain, but also as a political representation of totalitarianism, either it be National Socialism, Communism, or what have you. Now that we're nearing the last episode of Megatronic Legacy, we're going to take a look at the titular antagonist of the series, Megatron's Convoy, the fallen convoy himself. Thanks for watching, feel free to subscribe and like if you enjoy my content, and if you're new, and I'll catch you next time. Over and out.